The ballroom of Eco Hotels in Lagos was a sea of golden chandeliers, flowing wine, and the best of Lagos society. Zainab Okonkwo had spent 3 months planning her husband's 50th birthday celebration, the event of the season. She wore a sapphire blue girly tied with such precision that it made women whisper enviously. Her lace iro and buba were hand-beaded, her skin radiant with the glow of a wife who had done everything right for 25 years. Chinedu Okonkwo sat at the center table, king of his empire. Real estate developer. Father of 3. Deacon of their church. A man admired by everyone in Lekki and beyond. Zainab had defended him countless times to her friends, defended him when her sister Amora questioned his long hours, defended him when her mother noticed the distance between them, defended him so fiercely that people stopped asking questions. The speeches were flowing. His business partners praised his integrity. The pastor spoke of his Christian values. Zainab felt the warmth of validation fill her chest. This was her triumph too. She had been the quiet force behind every success, the woman who kept the home running, the wife everyone said was blessed. Then the lights dimmed for the video tribute. On the massive screen appeared Chinedu, not as everyone knew him, but in a Hilton hotel room, laughing with a woman who was not his wife. Not just any woman. The woman was Stella, Zainab's closest friend for 15 years. The woman Zainab had trusted with her secrets, her tears, her hopes. The video was explicit. Raw. Undeniable. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Phones came out immediately. Women gasped. Men looked away. Someone's mother fainted. But the most devastating moment came when someone, Zainab would never know who, shouted loud enough for the entire room to hear, "Wait. There's more. He's got another family in Ikoyi. I worked with him. Everyone knows." Zainab's world didn't just collapse. It shattered into 1,000 pieces that no one could ever reassemble. She stood frozen, her hand gripping the edge of the table so hard her knuckles turned white. Chinedu was already running from the ballroom like a thief. Stella was nowhere to be found. But every eye in that room, every single eye, was on Zainab. The woman who had defended a lie. The woman who had been made a fool of in front of 2,000 people. The woman who had become a symbol of either the greatest betrayal or the greatest blindness. She wasn't sure which was worse. A pastor's wife tapped her shoulder with pity. Another woman smirked with barely concealed delight. Someone whispered the word that would follow Zainab forever, deceived. Zainab gathered her dignity like broken glass, smiled the smile of a woman drowning, and walked out of that ballroom. She did not cry. She did not scream. She did not allow herself the luxury of breaking where anyone could see. But inside, in the quiet of the car ride home, the faithful woman who had built her entire identity on defending her husband began to understand the cruelest truth of all. She had spent 25 years defending someone else's dream, and lost herself in the process. The real shock wasn't what happened that night. The real shock was that everyone seemed to believe she had known all along. What would you do if your past was exposed in front of everyone you respected? If the man you spent your whole life defending turned out to be living a double life? Hit like if you've ever been judged unfairly, and comment where you're watching from. Let's hear your thoughts on Zainab's story. Zainab didn't leave their Lekki home for 3 weeks. The house staff whispered when they thought she couldn't hear. The gateman stopped greeting her. Her children, Chizim, Tund, and Neka, were dealing with their own public humiliation at their schools and workplaces. Her eldest son had already changed his number. Neka was getting attacked on Instagram by classmates who called her mother stupid and her father a fraud. But the cruelest part wasn't the public judgment. It was the internal one. She had known something was wrong. She had known it for years. The late nights. The phone that buzzed with messages he'd rushed to check. The way he kissed her forehead, a gesture of pity, not passion. The way he kept a separate email account that she'd accidentally discovered but never mentioned, convincing herself she was being a trusting wife. She had known. And she had chosen not to see it. Amora came to the house on a Thursday afternoon with pepper soup and the look of a woman who didn't want to say, "I told you so," but absolutely was thinking it. They sat in the kitchen, the same kitchen where Zainab had hosted endless gatherings for women's ministry groups, where she had smiled and served and played the role of the contented wife. "You need to talk to a lawyer," Amora said quietly, blowing on her spoon. "He's been freezing accounts. I have a friend whose husband did the same thing." "You have children, Zainab. You have rights." But Zainab wasn't ready to be practical. She was caught between two versions of reality, the woman she thought she was, and the woman everyone now believed her to be. A fool. A blind wife. A woman so desperate to keep a man that she couldn't see what was happening in her own marriage. The church was the next wound. Father Chinedu, as he was called in their Anglican parish, had been the model of piety. He gave sermons about integrity. He led the men's fellowship. He was the treasurer of the building fund. When the parish priest called Zainab to speak privately, she knew what was coming. "There are questions," he said gently. "Women in the parish are uncomfortable. They're asking if you knew about his behavior. If the church was being deceived as well." "I didn't know," Zainab whispered. The priest's silence told her something was, he didn't believe her. At night, alone in her bedroom, Chinedu had fled to a hotel in Victoria Island. Zainab sat with her phone and scrolled through social media. She saw her own face turned into memes. She read comments from people she'd never met. "African marriages are all fake. This is why women should focus on themselves. She must have been a terrible wife if he had to go outside." One comment made her pause. If she didn't notice, what does that say about her intelligence? Zainab threw her phone across the room. But as she sat in the darkness, another thought crept in, one that felt even more dangerous than the shame. What if she didn't want Chinedu back? What if the life she had been defending so fiercely had never been real? What if the woman she had become, the one so focused on keeping her marriage intact that she'd made herself invisible, was someone she couldn't even recognize anymore? For the first time in 25 years, Zainab didn't know who she was. And then came the letter. It was delivered by courier on a Friday morning. Legal papers. Chinedu was filing for a separation of assets and attempting to have the house transferred to his name based on a document he claimed she had signed years ago. A document she had no memory of signing. The papers included a demand: she had 30 days to vacate the house. Zainab's phone rang. It was Stella. "Please," her former friend whispered. "I'm sorry. I want to explain," Chinedu said. Zainab hung up. But the damage was already done. And somehow, Zainab knew this was only the beginning of her real suffering. What will Zainab do now? Comment your predictions below. Zainab went to see Mrs. Ifemalo Adeyemi on a Tuesday morning. Mrs. Adeyemi was the finest divorce attorney in Lagos, a woman with silver hair, sharp eyes, and a reputation for destroying men who thought they could outsmart her. She worked from a modest office in Ikoyi, with no fancy sign on the door. Everyone who needed her knew exactly where to find her. "He's lying," was the first thing Mrs. Adeyemi said after reviewing the documents. "This signature doesn't match your handwriting in any of the documents I see here. More importantly, look at the date on this deed." She slid a paper across the desk. "This was supposedly signed when you were pregnant with your daughter. You were hospitalized that entire month with placenta previa. There's a hospital record I can pull." "He forged this document, Zainab. This is fraud." Zainab felt something shift inside her, not relief exactly, but a kind of cold clarity. The man she had defended had not just betrayed her. He had actively, deliberately deceived her within the betrayal. He had planned for this. "There's more," Mrs. Adeyemi continued, pulling out another folder. "My investigator has been looking into his financial records. Chinedu has 3 investment accounts you didn't know about. He's been siphoning money for years. The other woman, Stella, isn't the only one. There's a second woman in Abuja. And based on what we found, he's got a 9-year-old daughter with her. The room went quiet. Zainab's hand moved to her chest. A daughter. While she had been planning birthday parties and church socials, Chinedu had been building another entire life. Another family. Another version of himself that he had carefully kept hidden. "I can fight him," Mrs. Adeyemi said. "And I will. But you need to be prepared for what comes next. He's going to paint you as a negligent wife. He's going to say you were too busy with church activities to pay attention to him. He's going to embarrass you in court." "I don't care," Zainab heard herself say. And she meant it. For the first time in weeks, she felt something other than shame. She felt anger. The legal fight began swiftly. Mrs. Adeyemi filed a counter-lawsuit for fraud. She demanded full asset disclosure. She moved to have the forged documents reviewed by a court-appointed handwriting expert. She filed a police report for forgery. But more importantly, she helped Zainab gather evidence. Zainab went back through 25 years of documents. Bank statements. Hotel receipts that Chinedu had accidentally left in jacket pockets. A jewelry store invoice for a bracelet she had never seen. Airline tickets to places they had never traveled together. She found the pattern of deception woven so carefully through their life that she couldn't believe she had missed it, or rather, that she had chosen to miss it. She found text on an old laptop where Chinedu had discussed with his friend Kola how to manage his wife. "Keep her busy with the house and church," he'd written. "Women like that are easy to keep distracted." Zainab read those words 3 times before she realized she was crying, not from hurt, but from the recognition of her own complicity in her own erasure. Then came the moment that changed everything. Amora called at midnight. "Turn on Pulse TV. Now." A journalist named Kofo Obi was breaking a story. She had been investigating Chinedu's real estate dealings for months. Turns out, several of his major developments were built on land he had acquired fraudulently, displacing families who had no legal representation. The story named names, showed families who had lost their homes, children who had lost their childhood. Chinedu wasn't just an unfaithful husband. He was a fraud who had destroyed people's lives for profit. And in the journalist's investigation, one thing became clear: Zainab had known nothing about it. Every person interviewed by the journalist said the same thing: his wife seemed like a good woman. She had no idea what he was doing. For the first time since the party, Zainab was believed when she said she didn't know. But her vindication came with a terrible price. Kofo's investigation wasn't finished. The journalist called Zainab directly. "I found something else. Something you need to see before it goes public. Can we meet? Can you believe how deep this goes? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who loves emotional drama. The secrets just keep coming." What do you think Kofo found? Comment below. What truth is about to be exposed? What's Zainab's secret? Comment your theories. They met at a coffee shop in 6, a quiet place where Zainab wouldn't be recognized. Kofo was younger than Zainab expected, maybe in her mid-30s, with an intensity in her eyes that suggested she already knew more than she was letting on. "Before I publish this story about you," Kofo said, "I need to understand something. 25 years ago, you didn't always live in Lekki. Your family moved here from Jos, right? And before that, you were married to someone else. To a man named Ibrahim Jallo. From Plateau State." Zainab's coffee cup stopped halfway to her lips. "I'm a journalist," Kofo continued softly. "I research my sources. I found newspaper archives from Jos. There was a story about a man named Ibrahim Jallo who was accused of theft from his employer. He was convicted. He spent 3 years in prison. And then, the same year he was released, he died in a car accident. I don't see how this is relevant to Chinedu, Zainab said carefully. It's not, Okonkwo agreed. It's relevant to you. Because according to the court records, you filed for divorce the day after Ibrahim was arrested. You took your daughter, Chisom, I assume, and disappeared from Jos. You left a man when he needed you most. You left him alone in prison. The coffee shop felt very small suddenly. He was innocent, Zainab whispered. The man who accused him, his name was Musa. Musa was having an affair with Ibrahim's supervisor. When Ibrahim reported it to the managing director, Musa accused him of theft. It was all lies. All of it. But you didn't stand by him, Okonkwo said. It wasn't a question. I was 22 years old, Zainab's voice shook. I had a 1-year-old child. Ibrahim's family turned against him because they believed the accusations. His own mother told me I should leave him. She said his shame would destroy our daughter's prospects. She said if I stayed, I would be linked to a criminal forever. My father said the same thing. Everyone said the same thing. Zainab's hands were trembling now. So I left. I took Chisom to Lagos. I got a job in a bank. I raised my daughter alone. And when Chinedu came into my life, a successful man, a man with status, a man who could give my daughter things I could never give her, I grabbed onto that life like a drowning person grabs a rope. And I never looked back. Ibrahim died alone, Okonkwo said. I know. Tears were running down Zainab's face now. I found out years later. A mutual friend told me. He got out of prison, and he had no one. His health was broken. He had no money, no family, nothing. He drove his car into a wall on the Lagos-Ibadan highway. They said it was an accident, but I've always wondered. Okonkwo was quiet for a long moment. Why are you telling me this? Zainab asked. Because I found something else in my investigation, Okonkwo said. Something that will matter. Ibrahim's sister recently came forward. She admitted that Musa bribed her to testify against her brother. She was dying, and before she died, she wanted to clear his name. There are documents. There's going to be an official inquiry into the wrongful conviction. It's big news in Plateau State. It will be national news. I don't understand. Ibrahim's name is going to be cleared, Okonkwo said. But more importantly, when his name is cleared, people are going to start asking questions. Why did his wife leave him? Where is she now? And Zainab, I'm not going to tell them. I'm not going to be the one who destroys your life again. But someone else will. Zainab felt the ground shifting beneath her. I came here to tell you that before I publish my story about Chinedu's fraud, Okonkwo continued, I wanted you to prepare yourself. Because your past is going to come up. People will ask why you left Ibrahim. They'll say you're a woman who abandons men when life gets hard. They'll say the reason Chinedu did what he did was because you were a cold woman. They'll use your past to justify his present. Is that fair? Zainab asked, barely audibly. No, Okonkwo said. But it's going to happen anyway. As Zainab sat in that coffee shop, she understood that her public humiliation wasn't going to end with Chinedu's betrayal. It was going to begin all over again, this time with the weight of 25 years of secrets. And the worst part was that she couldn't even blame anyone but herself. That night, Zainab received a message from a number she didn't recognize. It was a photo, a screenshot from an old news article about Ibrahim Jallo's conviction. Someone had written across it, liar. Used a good man and threw him away. The message came with an address, the location of Ibrahim's sister's house in Jos. Can you imagine carrying this secret for 25 years? Comment your thoughts on her redemption below. Does she deserve forgiveness, or has she crossed a line? Share this with someone who needs to hear this message. What will happen when she goes to Jos? Is Zainab's past about to catch up with her permanently? Zainab booked a flight to Jos without telling anyone. The city hadn't changed much in 25 years, the same red earth, the same hills, the same feeling of a place caught between tradition and time. She rented a car and drove to the address that had been sent to her, her heart hammering in her chest the entire time. Ibrahim's sister, Grace, was older now, maybe in her 70s, and she sat on the porch of a modest home with her granddaughter playing in the yard. She looked at Zainab for a long moment before she recognized her. "I didn't think you'd have the courage to come," Grace said. "I didn't know I did either," Zainab replied. Grace invited her inside. The home was simple but warm, with family photos covering every wall. Zainab's eyes landed on one immediately, Ibrahim as a young man, smiling, alive, innocent. "My brother was not the man you left," Grace said quietly. "Prison changed him. Made him smaller. Made him doubt himself. When he got out, he was a ghost. He went to your father's house once, asking for information about where you'd gone. Your father turned him away." "I didn't know," Zainab whispered. "No," Grace agreed. "But you could have looked. You could have come back. You could have found out that he was innocent before he died." "I was afraid," Zainab said. The words felt inadequate, but they were true. "Fear," Grace repeated. "Yes. I was afraid too. Afraid of what would happen to Ibrahim if I spoke up. Afraid of what the community would say about my family. Afraid of my own husband, who told me to keep quiet. So I lived with the lie. I lived with knowing that my brother was innocent, and I said nothing." She stood and walked to a drawer, pulling out a stack of letters. They were worn, creased from being read many times. "These are from Ibrahim," Grace said. "Letters he wrote to you after you left. He never sent them. He asked me once if I thought you would ever forgive him for getting arrested. He thought your leaving was his fault. He thought you hated him." Zainab took the letters with shaking hands. The envelope was addressed in Ibrahim's careful handwriting, "My Zainab." "I read them," Grace confessed. "Years later. And I realized that I had been cruel. Not just to my brother, to you. I knew you were young and frightened. I knew your family had turned against him. But I blamed you anyway. And my anger at you became another stone I had to carry. For 25 years, I carried it." "What changed?" Zainab asked. "I got sick," Grace said. "The doctors told me I had maybe a year left. And I realized that I was going to die still carrying that stone. So I decided to find the truth about Ibrahim's conviction, and I decided to find you. I wanted to tell you both that you were not to blame for the systems that failed you. But most importantly, I wanted to tell you that I forgave you, because I realized I had never had the right to judge you." Zainab couldn't speak. She was crying too hard. "There's something else," Grace said. "Ibrahim had a child. Not with you. A daughter he had with another woman after you left. He named her Zainab." The words landed like a physical blow. "He named his daughter after you?" Zainab asked. "He named his daughter after the woman he loved," Grace corrected. "The woman he never stopped loving, even though she abandoned him. And do you know what? When she was old enough, I told her about you. I told her how her father loved someone so much that he named her after that person. My niece became a social worker. She helps women in difficult situations. She says it's because of her father's story, because she wanted to understand why her mother couldn't stay, why women feel trapped, why love sometimes isn't enough." Grace took Zainab's hand. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel worse," she said. "I'm telling you this because my niece wanted me to tell you something. She wanted you to know that she doesn't blame you. She said that if she had been in your position at 22, with a child and no support, she might have done the same thing." "Where is she?" Zainab asked. In Nairobi, Grace said. But she's coming here next week for my birthday. She wanted to meet you. She wanted you to know that she forgives you. The ground beneath Zainab shifted again, but this time, it wasn't into darkness. This time, it was toward something she didn't recognize, hope. But that hope was interrupted by a phone call from Lagos. It was Mrs. Adeyemi. Turn on Channel's television, she said urgently. Chinedu has done something terrible. Could this story get any more complicated? Like, subscribe, and share this with someone who needs this message of forgiveness. What do you think Chinedu did? Comment below. What has Chinedu done now? Is this the final betrayal? What will it cost Zainab? The news report showed Chinedu at a press conference, looking gaunt and desperate. He was announcing that he was fleeing Nigeria. He had embezzled funds from 3 major development projects totaling over 2 billion naira. He was going to Dubai, where he claimed to have transferred most of his assets. And then came the worst part. I'm also filing a countercharge against my wife, he said into the microphone. I have evidence that she was complicit in some of these financial dealings. She will be arrested within the week. The screen went black as his lawyer blocked the cameras. Zainab was still in Jos when Mrs. Adeyemi called again. This is a lie, she said immediately. But it's a lie with consequences. He's trying to drag you down with him. We need to get you a criminal defense attorney, and we need to do it now. Grace was watching the news with her granddaughter. When she looked at Zainab, her expression was clear, she believed her. She didn't need evidence. She didn't need explanations. She simply knew that Zainab was not the kind of woman who would do what Chinedu claimed. But the world didn't know that. The internet exploded. Social media lit up with accusations. She probably knew, people said. She must have known. The same judgment that had destroyed her 6 weeks ago was back, now with added fuel. She was no longer just a woman with a philandering husband. She was now a woman involved in large-scale fraud. Her children called in panic. Nneka was being pulled from her university by her friends who had seen the news. Chisholm's law firm was asking him to resign immediately. Tond was receiving threats. But something had shifted in Zainab while she was in Jos. She called a press conference of her own. Not through an expensive Lagos venue, but from Grace's modest home in Jos, sitting beside her sister-in-law, in front of the very church where she had married Ibrahim 26 years ago. I am here, she said into the cameras, her voice steady, to tell you the truth of who I am. Not the woman your judgment has created, but the woman I actually am. She told them about Ibrahim. About leaving him in his darkest moment. About living with that shame for 25 years. She told them about how she had allowed her fear to shape her entire life. I came to this place to ask for forgiveness, she said. And I was given it not because I deserved it, but because someone chose to be merciful. The sister of a man I abandoned chose to show me grace. And that changed everything. She held up letters from Ibrahim. Letters that would now be released to the public, showing his innocence and his undying love for a woman who had left him. Letters that would help overturn his conviction posthumously. My husband, Chinedu Okonkwo, has committed terrible crimes, she continued. Crimes I knew nothing about. Crimes that have hurt many people. But I will not defend him. I will not stand by him. Instead, I will tell you the truth, I stand with the families he destroyed. I stand with the women who were betrayed by men just like him. I stand with everyone who has been harmed by his fraud. Then she announced something that shocked everyone. She was using her divorce settlement, what she would receive from Chinedu's assets before they were fully frozen, to establish a foundation. The foundation would help families displaced by fraudulent real estate dealings. It would help women who had been abandoned or betrayed, just as she had been. It would be called the Ibrahim Jallow Foundation for Justice and Reconciliation. I cannot change my past, Zainab said. I cannot go back and be the woman Ibrahim deserved. But I can be the woman I should have been all along, a woman who stands for those who have been wronged. The press conference was broadcast on every news channel in Nigeria. The criminal charges against her were dropped 3 days later when investigators found that every account she had any signature on had been forged by Chinedu. The same forged documents he had used to try to take the house were proof of his fraud against her. But more importantly, people believed her. Not because she was innocent, though she was, but because she had claimed her truth. She had stopped defending anyone else and started telling her own story. 2 weeks later, Zainab met Ibrahim's daughter for the first time. Zainab was 47 years old. Ibrahim's daughter, also named Zainab, was 34. She had her father's eyes and her mother's fierce spirit. She hugged Zainab without hesitation. My father would be proud of you, she said. For what you're doing now. I'm sorry I wasn't proud of him then, Zainab replied. But you are now, the younger Zainab said. And that's what matters. The foundation grew. It expanded from Lagos to Nairobi, to Accra, to Johannesburg. It became known as a place where women could go to rebuild their lives after betrayal. Where men could find resources after being wrongfully convicted. Where families could seek justice without shame. 6 months later, Chinedu was arrested in Dubai and extradited to Nigeria. He faced 20 years in prison. He had no visitors, no defenders, no one standing by him. The man who had spent 25 years carefully building a life of deception faced the consequences alone. Zainab didn't celebrate his arrest. She didn't feel victorious. She simply felt that a debt was being paid, even if it wouldn't fix what had been broken. She went back to church, not to perform, but to pray. She went back to her children and spent time actually listening to them, not just managing their lives. She went back to just 3 times a year to visit Grace, and to sit in silence with the ghost of a man she had failed but who had, somehow, taught her the most important lesson of her life. 1 year after the press conference, Zainab received a letter. It was from a woman in Nairobi. The woman had used the foundation to escape a marriage similar to Zainab's. She had found the strength to live, to rebuild, and now she was helping other women do the same. She thanked Zainab for sharing her story. The letter ended with a sentence that made Zainab cry, "You taught me that being betrayed doesn't define you. But how you respond to that betrayal absolutely does." Zainab looked at her reflection in the mirror. At 53, she saw a woman she recognized. Not the woman who had defended a lie. Not the woman who had abandoned a good man. Not the woman who had allowed herself to be erased by shame. She saw a woman who had survived judgment, from others and from herself. A woman who had turned her deepest failures into her greatest purpose. A woman who understood, finally, that resilience was not about never falling. It was about getting back up, looking people in the eye, and saying, "I failed, I suffered, I learned, and now I'm going to do better." The faithful woman had been betrayed. But the resilient woman, the woman who emerged from the ashes of that betrayal, was far stronger than she ever could have been. And her story was just beginning. The book launch of From Faithful to Free, My Journey Through Betrayal took place at a boutique bookstore in Victoria Island, Lagos. Zainab stood at the podium, looking out at a room filled with women of all ages, all walks of life. There was an elderly woman in the front row who could have been her mother. Next to her sat a young girl, maybe 18, clutching the book like it was a lifeline. There were women in traditional attire sitting next to women in corporate suits. There were women whose eyes held stories of their own betrayals. Zainab began to read from her book. The question I was asked most often was, "How could you not know?" The answer is complicated. I didn't want to know. Knowing would have meant admitting that the life I had built was a lie. It would have meant being alone. It would have meant starting over at an age when starting over feels impossible. So I made a choice, The same choice so many of us make. I chose comfort over truth. I chose the familiar over the real. But here's what I learned in the aftermath of that choice: sometimes we have to lose everything in order to find what actually matters. Sometimes we have to be broken in public in order to be healed in private. And sometimes the greatest gift we can give to anyone, including ourselves, is the permission to be human. She looked up from the book and saw tears in many faces. My greatest hope is that my story gives someone the courage to tell their own. To stop defending the life that isn't working. To stop pretending that loyalty means accepting lies. To stop measuring your worth by who stands beside you and start measuring it by who you are when you're finally standing alone. A young woman in the third row raised her hand. "How did you forgive yourself?" she asked. Zainab paused. It was the question she asked herself every single day. "I'm still working on that," she said honestly. "Some days are easier than others. But I realized that forgiveness isn't about erasing what you did. It's about understanding why you did it, learning from it, and making a different choice the next time. It's about accepting that you were doing the best you could with the information and tools you had at that moment. And then it's about becoming someone who has better tools." She closed the book gently. "I was a woman who loved too quietly and defended too loudly. I was a woman who had learned that survival meant staying small, staying silent, staying safe. When everything fell apart, I had a choice. I could have stayed broken. I could have blamed everyone else. I could have hidden. Instead, I chose to look at my own hands and ask, what have I done? What have I not done? And what am I going to do now?" The audience stood and applauded. But Zainab wasn't looking at them. She was looking at the back of the room, where Grace stood with her granddaughter and the younger Zainab. They were crying too. 3 months after the book launch, Zainab received data from the foundation. Over 2,000 women had accessed their services. 63 wrongfully convicted men had been exonerated with help from their legal team. 40 families displaced by Chinedu's fraudulent developments had received compensation and support in rebuilding their homes. But the most significant impact came in the form of a letter from a woman named Amina in Accra. Amina had read Zainab's book and recognized her own story: a husband with secrets, a woman with her eyes closed. Amina had summoned the courage to demand the truth. Her husband had admitted to infidelity and financial crimes. Instead of standing by him, Amina had left, filed for divorce, and started her own business. The letter said, "You taught me that loyalty to a man doesn't have to cost me my dignity. Thank you for showing me that the most loyal thing I can do is be loyal to myself." It was that letter that made Zainab understand the full magnitude of what her pain had created. Her suffering had become medicine for others. In Nairobi, the foundation's director, a woman named Dr. Njeri, who had herself escaped an abusive marriage, implemented a new program. It was a mentorship circle where successful women would meet with women in crisis, sharing their stories of how they had rebuilt their lives. Zainab was invited to be a mentor, and she accepted immediately. In Johannesburg, the foundation partnered with local law enforcement to create a task force investigating financial fraud in real estate dealings. They had already identified and prosecuted 17 developers operating with schemes similar to Chinedu's. But perhaps the most meaningful moment came when Zainab received a call from a man named Michael. Michael had been wrongfully convicted of a crime in South Africa 30 years ago. After reading about the foundation's work helping exonerate men, he had contacted them with his own case. The foundation's investigators took on his case pro bono. 2 months later, new evidence proved his innocence. Michael called Zainab to thank her. "I spent 30 years believing I deserved what happened to me," he said. "Because the woman I loved left me. I thought if she had stayed, it would have proven my innocence. But hearing your story, I realized something. I deserved support when I needed it most, not because I was innocent, but because I was human. And your foundation is giving that support to people who are still suffering. Thank you for understanding that justice isn't just about proving innocence. It's about restoring dignity. 5 years after the press conference, Zainab was invited to speak at a conference on African women's resilience at the University of Lagos. The auditorium was packed with students, faculty, and women from across the continent. She stood at the podium and looked out at faces that could have been hers at different ages. Young women on the edge of their lives, trying to figure out who they were going to become. Older women who had already lived through betrayals and losses that she could only imagine. I want to tell you about a woman I used to know, Zainab began. She was a good woman. She did everything right. She raised her children. She kept her home. She stood by her husband. She went to church. She volunteered. She was the kind of woman that other women aspired to be. The problem was that she wasn't real. She was a performance. And performances, no matter how perfect they are, always eventually crack. And when they do, the fall is catastrophic. I want to tell you that you don't have to be that woman. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to defend people who are unworthy of your defense. You don't have to shrink yourself to fit into the spaces other people have carved out for you. I want to tell you that being a woman of strength isn't about never falling. It's about who you become when you stand back up. It's about looking at your broken pieces and asking, what did I learn? Who do I want to be now? And then making the choice to become that person, no matter how hard it is. She paused, her voice becoming quieter, more intimate. I was a faithful woman. And I was betrayed. But here's the thing no one told me, my faithfulness to my husband didn't cost him anything because he didn't love me. My faithfulness was paid for entirely by me in the currency of my own life, my own identity, my own voice. But when I shifted my faithfulness, when I became faithful to my own healing, faithful to telling my own truth, faithful to using my pain to help others, everything changed. That was when I became powerful. Not because I was stronger than anyone else, but because I was finally honest about who I was. A young woman in the front row raised her hand. Mama Zainab, she said, using the respectful title the younger generation had begun calling her, what do you want us to remember most from your story? Zainab smiled. It was a question she had asked herself many times. I want you to remember, she said, that your past doesn't define you. Your mistakes don't define you. The ways you were wrong don't define you. Only what you choose to do with all of that defines you. And you get to choose. Every single day, you get to choose who you become. The Ibrahim Jallow Foundation for Justice and Reconciliation had expanded across the entire African continent. It operated in 15 countries, had helped exonerate over 100 wrongfully convicted individuals, and had provided support and resources to more than 10,000 people affected by fraud, betrayal, and injustice. Zainab, now 63 years old, stepped back from day-to-day management of the foundation to focus on writing and speaking. Her second book, Letters to Ibrahim, How I Learned to Love Again, had become a bestseller across Africa and was being translated into 12 languages. More importantly, she had healed her relationships with her children. Chizem had become a civil rights attorney and worked directly with the foundation's legal team. Ton had become a financial advisor, helping families rebuild their wealth after fraud. Neka had become a therapist specializing in trauma and betrayal, offering free counseling to foundation clients. Her grandchildren grew up hearing stories about resilience, about the importance of speaking truth, and about how one woman's pain could become medicine for millions. But perhaps the most profound moment came when Zainab received a phone call from a woman in Kigali, Rwanda. The woman said, I am the daughter of the child you left behind 26 years ago. I am the child of Ibrahim Jallow. My mother remarried and raised me in Rwanda. I grew up never knowing that my father had named me Zainab, after a woman who left him. I read your book, and I understood the full story for the first time. I want you to know that I don't blame you. I want you to know that my father's love, even when it was unrequited, shaped me into someone who loves deeply. And I want to thank you for that. Thank you for being part of my story, even in your absence. Zainab wept. She realized, then, that healing wasn't about erasing the past. It was about integrating it. It was about accepting that even our worst choices, even our greatest failures, can somehow contribute to something beautiful if we're willing to transform them. On a warm evening in Lagos, Zainab sat with Grace in the garden of Grace's home in Ikoyi. They had both moved past their anger, past their blame, into a space of genuine companionship. They had become like sisters, not by blood, but by shared truth. Do you think Ibrahim would forgive you? Grace asked, as she had asked many times over the years. And Zainab, as she always did, gave the same answer, I don't know. But I think he already had. How do you know that? Grace asked. Because he named his daughter after me, Zainab said. If he had not forgiven me, he would have named her something else. He would have let me go. But he kept me alive in his heart. In the only way he could. And to me, that is forgiveness. The two women sat in comfortable silence as the Lagos sun turned the sky orange and gold. In the distance, they could hear the sounds of the city, the hawkers, the traffic, the music, the life of a continent that had held both of them through their darkest hours. Zainab thought about the journey that had brought her here. From the ballroom in Eco Hotels where her life had shattered. To the courtroom where she had fought for her truth. To Jos, where she had faced her past. To the foundation that had given her a new purpose. To this garden, with a woman who had chosen grace over judgment. Do you know what I've learned? Zainab said softly. What? Grace asked. That betrayal is a teacher, Zainab said. Not a good teacher. Not a teacher I would choose. But a teacher nonetheless. It teaches you who you are when everything is stripped away. It teaches you what you're capable of when you have nothing left to lose. And it teaches you to see other people's pain with more compassion, because you understand, finally, how easy it is to hurt, and how hard it is to heal. Grace squeezed Zainab's hand. And the most important thing it taught you? Grace pressed. Zainab smiled, the smile of a woman who had lived through fire and found diamonds in the ash. That I was never actually faithful to my husband, she said. I was faithful to the idea of him. And when that idea shattered, I was free to become faithful to myself. And that, my sister, made all the difference. Thank you for following Zainab's complete journey. If her story touched your heart, please like, subscribe, and share with others who need to hear that redemption is possible. Comment below, what was the most important moment in her story for you? What lesson will you carry with you? Let's build a community of resilience together.